Hello, friends. Welcome to River Rants, the listener mail portion of the Shat on TV presentation of Taboo FX podcast. This is the companion piece to the hit FX show Taboo. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is one of my co-hosts, Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
So this is our fan email episode where we look back on this week's episode of Taboo and provide our feedback to the top listener emails for the week. This week's episode was episode 4 of Taboo, and we have some great emails that came in. Again, it's growing every week. Big D, have you had a chance to read through these?
I have not. Work has precluded me from doing that, so I'll be coming into these blind. But I got to tell you, I'm surprised that the audience that we've garnered from Taboo is quite loyal. It's nowhere near the size of Westworld, but they're extremely active, and it's been nice to see. So I'm excited to see what we got in the mailbag.
Awesome. So I've had an opportunity to go through these and do a little bit of research into them, but most of them were greatly researched on their own. So a lot of this will actually be us sharing these facts that have been dug up by listeners like you, and so we hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, I think the show's been a lot of fun to do historical research. I work with a woman who's from London, and I've on multiple occasions sat her down and started probing her for some information, talking about the show. She is a BBC One subscriber, so it's been a lot of fun. So it's nice to see that people don't just get excited by robots, shootouts, and sex, that some true drama with historical base gets people excited too. But why don't we get on the side of the river and start screaming?
Take us to the river, Big D. Okay, so our first email of this edition of River Rants comes from a repeat writer to the show, Stefano. And Stefano asks, what does James Delaney really want? The attempt to break the East India Company's monopoly in China and Canada tea trade seems a way to get back at the company and getting rich while at it. It also represents the core of the proposal that Delaney makes to the Crown and to the Americans. Quoting Delaney, he says, "Tea, you tell Carlsbad I want tea. You tell Carlsbad from me that I will cede sovereignty of Nootka Sound to whichever nation offers me their monopoly on the trade of furs for tea from Fort George to Canton. A monopoly. That's what I want, all the tea in China. Also, the production of gunpowder as a mean to exchange with the Nootka Sound natives goes in the same direction of the establishment of a trade network. However, it all seems a little too straightforward a plan, especially considering how Delaney, thanks to Godfrey, is privy to the fact that the EIC suspects that he wants or needs gunpowder. As Taboo appears deeply rooted in history, it is necessary to consider that the shared sovereignty on Nootka continued to be an item of dispute between the U.S., the UK, and later Spain until 1846. Also, the EIC did not lose its monopoly for trade in tea and the trade with China until the Government of India Act in 1833. So, we may reasonably assume that James Delaney will not be successful in his effort in breaking the monopoly, but we can also assume that the fur and tea trade is not the real objective, and there must be another way for him to take his revenge at the EIC. Again, quoting Delaney, Stefano writes, "I want a line of conference with the President of the 15 States of America. I want to meet with the embassy in Paris. When the time is right and the company has fallen, we can leave. I have accrued a band of loyal servants, none of whom have any value to me beyond the facilitation of this greater good. And also, there is enough treachery already surrounding us that there is no need for us to add to it." That's what he writes to Zilpha. The content of these letters and James's reaction to Thorne's outburst at the party in order to keep the secrets buried clearly outline the deep affection and desire toward his half-sister. Every outcome must therefore include her for James to consider it a success. Also, while he appears extremely confident in every verbal exchange and clearly imposes his will at a distance in their spiritual, quote, encounters, end quote, James seems genuinely shocked and uneasy when he is surprised by Zilpha's presence. That's from Stefano.
I go back to a simple motivation. James does not that we've seen care about wealth. Right now, he has money to do as he will, so of course we're not going to see him coveting it. But I truly believe his motives are much simpler. And he quoted the line in there, "When the company falls." This is a simple revenge tale. Getting wealthy, getting rich, getting a monopoly on tea, that's beneath James. I think also at the core of what motivates him is his sister. So there is no way that James could take down the EI by himself. So this chess match that we see facilitates the engagement of two larger entities than the EI. James can't do it, but when you start getting governments and nations in play, that is the only power that could truly threaten the EI. And we know from history that the EI maintains its hold on the trade routes, but still some 50, 60 years later, the EI falls. That could be due to something that James begins greasing the wheels and leads to their inevitable fold. But I think that's simply what he wants.
Absolutely, Big D. From a historical perspective, it's not really a spoiler if you're considering, actual world history. The major player in the decline of the East India Company was the crown itself. And if you look at it from that perspective, it seems that, again, is James going to single-handedly take them down? No, but he could play in this fictional tale an unsung role that we never heard about in history that led to the fall of the East India Company.
But don't you think it's a bit odd when he's in the room with Sir Strange? Sir Strange is a bright guy. He seems to be aware of all the pieces. He says, I know the evil that you do because I was once one of you. How is Sir Strange not seeing that revenge could be a motive for James?
I think the men who run the East India are of a certain cut that, they want two things, essentially, power and money. And those two things often don't align. Revenge is the antithesis of seeking power and money. It is usually against your best interests. And so I think that it probably isn't an angle that they're even exploring. But they do, I think, take precautions against it. They know that he's out to get them, but they believe he's out to get them from either a traitorous sense, an international conspiracy, or in a financial sense.
Yeah, I think that they don't even view James as a true threat in anything beyond just the Nootka Treaty. It's a huge mistake. It's, the Death Star. They didn't think that one TIE fighter was a true threat, but I think Sir Strange would be wise to go back and start to research James's history and see where the seeds of his hatred began.
Excellent. Thank you, Stefano, for that email. And we're going to fly our X-Wing right over to the next one. This one's from Linda M. Linda says, I've read some people's comments around the web speaking of their growing dislike for James after the scene with Godders. I, however, didn't have an issue for two reasons. So she's referring to the scene where James is lying in bed, kind of alone with Godders, and he seems to insult Godders. First, James really doesn't care about hurting people's feelings, except maybe Zilpha. He speaks his truth. Can it be harsh, even mean? Yes, it can. Second, coming from working in the kink and fetish world, I see that James is assuming his dominance over Godders. James is very much an alpha male. Godders is not only a sissy, a term widely used in a dominant and submissive role, but also very submissive, especially to James because he loves him. Some subs and or sissies even take perverse pleasure in being shamed or humiliated. I speak with them daily. James understands Goddard's feelings. He gets him, and by calling him half a man or something to that effect, it isn't an insult, really, to Goddard's. Is it PC? No. But this is the type of language and behavior accepted in the kink world. That is why I didn't find it offensive, whereas I can understand someone vanilla, someone not into dominance and submission or kink, would. And that's from Linda M.
Wow, Linda. I want some more details on your work day, the kink and fetish world.
It's interesting. I have a friend, Jay, here in Phoenix, and we go to different fetish balls and stuff like that. And one night I was out dancing at a goth club, as I'm prone to doing, and there's this beautiful woman in like these skin tight like latex pants, super cute. And I was checking her out, and she goes and sits by Jay. And so finally, after she goes to the bar, I go ask Jay. I say, "Hey Jay, what's the story? You dating her? Like, is she single? What's going on?" And Jay goes, "Oh no, she's just one of my subs." And explains to me essentially, like, I was aware of the, I have friends who work as doms in L.A. and New York, but I'd never actually been in that opposite, perspective where it was actually this like incredibly attractive woman who basically her relationship with Jay is not romantic. It's strictly dom sub. She wants him to dominate and tell her what to do. And he's like, do you want to be involved in this? And I was like, I don't think so. Not that I have any issue with doms and subs, but it was just something that I kind of had to do more research into how that dynamic works. And yeah, to her being, put in that submissive role was ecstasy.
Yeah, I can imagine that it would be somewhat liberating. I would be down to try that. That'd be kind of exciting. I've tried a lot in my life, but sub-dom has never been one of them. But, the bucket list is still going. But the wife might get in the way of that. And I don't think I'm going to convince her to become my dom. But there is one additional layer that we have to add to this. Certainly it's not PC. The things that he says, you can take them as cold. You can really view James' character. Let's not forget, James and Goddard's were comrades in arms. They had intimate knowledge of each other. They even slept in the same bed. When you have a relationship, and I think men have a tendency when you become close to another man that things that anyone else said would be offensive, would be wrong. A lot of times men, that banter go back and forth, that they blur that line. So James truly might not be condescending, but this might be, just a manifestation of their relationship. Roger, I talk to him daily, and there's times that I say things to him that are horrendous. That if somebody watching heard me talk to him or the things that he says to me, they would think we were just the worst people on the planet, and there's no way we were friends.
So yeah, thanks, Linda M. Love that you used the term vanilla. I feel a kinship already. So appreciate that email. And moving on to the next one. Our next email comes from Onesto V from Folsom, California. And he writes, "For certain, Zilpha was born to a different wife of Horace. It's not yet clear if this marriage was before, during, or after his marriage to Anna. This unnamed wife was of British high society. Otherwise, Thorne would never marry Zilpha. It will be interesting to see if it comes out that Horace's marriage to his slave, Anna, would not be recognized by British law. This alone would be enough to drive Anna insane or depressed, let alone if Horace were to marry a high society bride in the church while Anna was still living in the house with young James. At some point, Anna is kept in a room separated from the family and eventually committed to Bedlam. It is not yet clear where or when Horace married Anna. In the U.S., in a Salish tribal ceremony at Nootka, or after returning in the Anglican Church, having been passed off as Neapolitan. In any case, because Horace married his slave, their marriage would not be recognized by England and convey no rights. Keep up the good work and the discussions on this wonderfully produced, dark, and provocative show." Again, that's Onesto from Folsom.
So that presumes that she was his slave at the point that they got married, correct?
Well, I think what he's saying is that, that not necessarily that she was a slave when they got married, but that she was purchased and therefore his property.
So I know that, after the Civil War, there were slaves that were purchased and freed. He could very well have purchased her, fallen for her, even fallen for her before he purchased her, freed her. At that point, I believe they would have to honor the marriage. But as far as high society, I think we've learned anything that, yes, high society and standing of the name and the family is important, but money always has a way of getting people of lower stratification, lower classes to rise up quickly. We don't know necessarily that the Delaneys were of high society. We just know they were of wealth.
True, and the merchant class was very much an emerging thing and a changing thing in these times, in the turn of the 19th century. It's also important to note that upward mobility in the UK and Britain historically has been much more difficult than America. So you've got to take a look at and consider that fact that it was a rarity for anyone to move upward in society at this time in England. And so therefore there could be very strong motivations there and very dark secrets in there.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that leads me to believe that they were of a higher class is the comment Zilpha made when she references that her father had embarrassed her in his later years, which would insinuate that she had someone to be embarrassed from, and that would be the elite class, the other aristocrats.
Thank you, Ernesto, for your thoughtful email. Next up in the River Rants, we've got one from Joe. And this is Joe from Utica. Utica Joe. He says, hello, gentlemen. This is Joe from Utica again. This is going into tinfoil hat territory. This week's episode got me asking the question, how do the Americans know about the history of love and incest between James and his sister? One possible source I've come up with is that in anticipation of the estate of Horace being passed on to his daughter, the Americans began to spy on her to find a way to get the land. This is before James comes back to London, and they continue the information gathering to then get to him. This would allow them to hear Thorne's rants and see Zilpha's behaviors and bring them to that conclusion. Another explanation is that Brace is now informing on James to the Americans. I would think that Brace knew about the past history of the children under his care and thus would be able to provide the Americans with that kind of leverage. This also could pose the question if Brace could have been working with the Americans prior to all this for a move on the land. Now, for this to work, it would mean that Brace did indeed poison Horace and shows the logic behind it. Lastly, if a duel between James and Thorne does happen, I think James uses it to emasculate Thorne publicly and put him in his place. Thorne challenged him to a duel while drunk out of his fucking mind, and I can only see this backfiring on Thorne. Still loving the podcast. Keep up the good work, gentlemen. And that's from Joe from Utica.
I think I've always been on the Brace train, that he is the head of the mutineers. But we've learned that secrets of the bedroom rarely stay secret. If they had a young incestuous relationship, there are more people that had to have known. There's no way that goes unnoticed. And have we heard the actual situation in which James and Zilpha grew up? Do we know if there was ever a point that they maybe cohabitated together and that the relationship was the grounds for breaking them apart?
We really don't know that background. And it's, again, people have kind of taken shots at timelines to figure out, when exactly they would have had an opportunity to be together and be of an age where sexual interest would have been present. And so it does seem, though, with their father, traveling a lot to Nootka, again, the mother being dead, apparently from James's early childhood when he was still in the single digits of age, there might have been times there where those two spent a significant amount of time together and had the opportunity there, for sure.
And we've seen Zilpha, even as an adult, in a social setting where she knows she needs to be cautious. She can't contain those glances that she throws at James. Anyone in the room would have to understand what was going on. It could be many other players.
Again, I know we say it all the time, but going back to this Bronte sort of Wuthering Heights analogy there, or drawing the parallels between the two things, this is very much a take on that, in the sense that characters, Kathy and Heathcliff, that they had this magnetism that when they were in each other's presence, they could not control themselves, and they could watch the whole world falling apart around them, and it didn't matter. I mean, that was the intensity of the attraction, no matter how wrong.
Yeah, and passion, no matter how well you think you contain it, it will always seep out the sides. People can always sense it.
Wow, Big D.
What?
I've never seen this side of you.
I'm quite passionate.
My. All right. Thank you so much, Joe, for writing into us again. And again, thank you so much for these repeat writers. We have a few new voices on this episode, but it's great to hear people who have been repeat writers on River Rants, and also people who have come along with us from the Westworld Telegraph. Really wonderful to have these familiar voices and really insightful stuff. Next one comes from Nico. Nico writes, depending on your interpretation of Algonquin lore, the Wendigo is either a monster that was never human but appears to be human, or it's an evil spirit that possesses a real human host. Regardless, the result is the same. They feed off humans. Personally, I'm of the school of thought that believes greed, or if you want to bring in Christian themes, sin, can cause an individual to turn into a Wendigo. Now, who do we know could have been greedy and has led to a questionable life on their recent return to England? James Delaney, of course. I'm not saying he's literally a Wendigo, but that could be where the rumors of cannibalism came from. Most of my information about Wendigos comes from Algernon Blackwood's novella, The Wendigo, and I highly recommend it if you want an amazing, fairly quick read. So, is it a possibility that James has been possessed or is still possessed by a Wendigo? The Wendigo connection is also completely possible because even if he hasn't been to Nootka Sound and learned of Wendigos there, and this theory might also be crazy, it may have been his mother who was possessed, and that's why she had the erratic behavior and had to be locked up. A bunch of Englishmen probably aren't going to know about the evil Native American spirits after all. And now, many years later, the Wendigo spirit, his mother, is coming back to haunt James for his sins, which include possibly participating in the slave trade or killing slaves. Again, thank you so much for your time and your amazing podcast, Nico.
I don't like the idea that James is being controlled or he is an instrument of whether it's a Wendigo or some form of spirit. He seems to have quite a clarity in what he's doing in his mission. I don't think he's greedy. I don't think anything is driving him except for his end goal. But when you talk about his parents, his father, they were obviously troubled, and a possession of his mother would explain a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Such a big piece of the puzzle that we're missing, and it's quite convenient. The background story of his mother. I just want an episode where Zilpha and him reveal even the littlest pieces that can tell us, because right now we don't know. Who was he raised by? Who did he consider his mother? Other than the initial conversation with Brace, we've been given such little information.
We're such bastards, Big D, because Westworld will give us straight exposition, and we complain about straight exposition. We're like, show us, don't tell us. And then when they won't tell us, we get frustrated. So,
I'm not frustrated. I'm not frustrated. It's more of like an eager excitement. Like it's one of those things that you want. When I sit down and watch it on Saturday, there are certain things that I want to see. I'm not upset that they don't give it to me. I'm actually happy that they tease me quite a bit because it shows that they have the strength and the courage to believe in the material and that they will get us there eventually. I just want it now. I'm impatient.
I do like the idea of the Wendigo, or at least the parable of the Wendigo, because of the fact that if you look at the things that are associated with the Wendigo, cannibalism, murder, greed, and cultural taboos, those all fall in line. I wonder if James even adopted the lore of the Wendigo as sort of his, again, we talked about him being sort of a Batman-like superhero.
Yes, they're cultural taboos in London, in England. But in Nootka, they're not. They're just the accepted culture of what you were raised as. And it's common, the misconception of, first world nations to think, backwoods, that other cultures that seem more barbaric, and they reference him almost as he is a lower class, an animal. And I think that's just not understanding the culture. It would be also believable that mental illness, often it was thought there was a cause of that it was a possession, that there was some evil spirits involved. It could be simply a case of a cultural misunderstanding compounded with a form of mental illness. You have the neighbors talking, and before you know it, that's the story out there, that it's possession. But there are really some basic, simple explanations that could kind of dispel all those.
Thanks, Nico, for your email. Following on the trail of blood, we're moving to Stacy's email for the River Rants. And Stacy writes, Bloody Tinfoil Theory. Blood is the foundation of the Delaney family mystic nature. When James confronted the slave in the morgue, he points a blood-covered hand and finger at the slave to vanquish the spirit. James bites the neck of his would-be assassin in order to consume his blood and therefore have power over or protection from the spirit of the assassin. Recall the scene of Zilpha doing needlepoint. She pricks her finger and puts the bloody finger in her mouth. Immediately after, she is argumentative with Thorn and holds her own in that verbal exchange in a way she normally does not. Lastly, we cannot dismiss Thorn's tirade at the dinner table about Zilpha's blood, and that is all he gets. Great stuff, guys. I'm all in. Stacy.
I don't even know where to go here with this. What do you think?
I mean, I love this. This was the email that got me talking to friends about this blood theory, in the sense that there is a recurring theme with blood being used in communication, in power shifts, and in the divination and interaction with the dead. I think blood is, and again, going back to episode 1 when they talked about madness being passed through the umbilical cord, just this idea that, family, incest, basically non-Christian or pagan ritual, all this goes back to the idea of blood, and it's an interesting metaphor or motif, even if it's not something that's expressly a moving force in this show.
Yeah, and it's not only the liquid inside of all of us, the carrier of the hemoglobin, and it is also the ties between relatives. It is blood family. That is also another aspect of this that we need to think of. But you're correct. The multiple references to blood are not by mistake.
Yeah, so basically Westworld had its flies, Taboo's got its blood, the recurring motifs, and there's a lot of artistic expression there. I think it's a mark of a good show. Thank you, Stacy. Next up is Trav. Trav writes, "Hey, duders, your podcast rules. I don't really buy the brace is slowly poisoning James. Any person ever would notice that something is wrong when they start having unprompted hallucinations. People don't just take acid or drugs and go through the experience like everything is normal. James would know immediately if he was being poisoned. I think he just has extreme PTSD and constantly makes it clear to the audience and everyone he interacts with that he is mad. There is something deeper with James that we haven't learned yet. For instance, the hallucination of the woman in the water occurs when he is knee-deep in water in the basement. The connection of water is what sparked his traumatic visions. I would bet it's either PTSD or some element of supernatural that coincides with his ability to speak with flames and perform the rituals of blowing dust that he might have learned in Africa. Let me know your thoughts. I look forward to the podcast every week. Trav."
Well, we know that James has these visions, and that's all it is to us right now, because we don't have a historical knowledge to say, yes, these are recollection of traumatic experiences which he has had. If someone were mentally disturbed and were having unexplainable voices, visions, as an actual medical condition, if you then also started to poison them, I don't know that they would be able to tell the difference. I don't think that James would immediately be aware of the difference. Do you?
Yeah, it kind of goes to the idea of of gaslighting, right? In the sense that when a person's reality is unsure to begin with, it's very easy to manipulate that reality further, right? You start with if you didn't know, say, the difference between night and day, say you're being held captive. I hope this never happens to anybody listening. I hope it's not happening to you right now. But if you are, held captive, and you don't know night from day, it would be very easy for someone to further manipulate your sense of time, years and months and such. So in that sense, I think that it would be very easy to slip in other factors to further confuse him.
And whether or not he is actually poisoning him, we know that James sees that as a possibility. Immediately, the first interaction they have, when brandy is proposed, James says 2 glasses. Then everything has to be wine in cask, beer in bottle. James is aware of the potential, so I think we should be as well.
Another thing, Trav, is talking about the water triggering the traumatic visions. We talked about blood in Stacy's email. Talking about water here, you notice even when the British come, when the Redcoats come to take Lorna Bowe away, James is either dreaming, but I think what he's actually doing is meditating, and in that his vision is water, again, floating in water. Nootka Trading Company is being carried on water. The East India sails across water. Water is, and all the occurrences that happen in the Thames, in the cellar of Delaney home. Water is a prevalent metaphor in this show, and it's definitely connected to something there that happened to James. I think you're on the right track as far as deciding factor in his life that made things change happened on the water.
Well, all throughout history, water was used as a primary method of transportation. On the other side of the pond, the ocean, rivers. Before roads were widespread and use was available to everyone, water was seen as a way of traveling. And I don't think it's a coincidence that James and his father would communicate on the banks of the river. So I think this is showing actually a method of conveyance. But just one last thing on Brace. Brace also has a knack of always reinforcing to James the history of family illness. He does not miss an opportunity to say, oh, this is crazy, you're boarding the window. Oh, this is just like your father. He is reinforcing this mental illness in an unnatural way to me that a caregiver or someone who has essentially raised him almost as a surrogate father. It's too convenient that Brace is pushing him along and reinforcing that. It just seems unnatural, and that's why I really believe in the poisoning. He's trying to push him the way he did Horace.
All right, thanks for your email, Trav. Next up, we have just one of our shortest emails that led to one of the deepest rabbit holes I've fallen into, and it's from Kevin. And Kevin wrote an email that strictly said, an Englishman taken by slave by the Nootka tribe in 1800s, and then a link. And the link goes to a Wikipedia article about a John R. Jewett. Here's the story. So John R. Jewett was on a ship called the Boston that was in Nootka, or on the West Coast. And on the 22nd of March, 1803, the day before the Boston intended to set sail, many Nootka came aboard and were given dinner. At a signal, the Nootka attacked and all but 2 of the white men were killed. Jewett suffered a serious head injury, but his life was saved by Makina, who saw how useful it would be to have an armorer there to repair weapons. Makina asked Jewett if he would be his slave, and Jewett assented under duress, as an alternative was immediate death. This was the beginning of 3 years among the Nootka. So Jewett was a captive until 1805, during which time he became immersed in the Nootka culture and was forced to marry. The distinction between a prisoner of war and slave is not clear-cut, but Jewett lost his liberty and had to work for Makina. Jewett uses the word slave to describe his position and asserts that Makina had about 50 others, consisting of half his household. Slaves were Nootka's most valuable property, and they might be killed if they tried to run away. Jewett says that slaves ate with the family, the same food and different dishes, were generally well treated but had to work hard. Often the king's household would run short of food, so he would have to beg elsewhere. And Makina showed Jewett to undertake other work when not employed by him. He used that privilege to make bracelets, fish hooks, and so on, and to trade with the chiefs of the village and other visitors. Other chiefs or kings attempted to buy Jewett, but Makina declined. Also, Jewett was allowed to keep his Christian beliefs. He was permitted to keep the Sabbath by withdrawing on Sundays to bathe and read and pray. The men even made an effort to cook and eat a special Christmas dinner and often gave thanks for his continued existence. The women, including Makina's 9 wives, expressed compassion towards Jewett, but the 500 warriors wanted him to be killed. Makina repeatedly protected Jewett and refused to allow his death. He adopted a conciliatory approach and made an effort to learn the language. What's interesting about that is, in addition to that, looking into the Nootka, you have this kind of a reverse tale there with Jewett, but also the slave ships used and mentioned in Taboo have fictitious names, but the routes in the cargo are historically correct. Also, the red and brown face powder that Tom Hardy uses in this is ceremonial for men among the Nootka. Marrying within the family is not uncommon among the Nootka. Wives are sold to their husbands as property among the Nootka. And they also have luck animals and believe in communicating with the dead. So a lot of things that we've seen in this show actually are attributable to this tribe, to this region in the Pacific Northwest of America.
Yeah, I think we have to believe that James's core beliefs have transformed. Who he was in England is not who he is now. I can't see that change coming without some form of force. And him being imprisoned and him being forced to immerse himself in the culture, it sounds right on the mark to me.
I think what's interesting is we've always assumed that, and I think the show points us in that direction, that Africa is where James found religion or magic or what have you, and underwent a great change. But here it seems that there's also this idea of, of his cultural cornerstones coming from his mother's tribe. And I wonder, there have been some people who wrote in, and there's other chatter on the internet, that maybe it was sort of this, and this is getting very X-Men, but sort of a joining of the two. It was this perfect storm between his mother's, background and then him being, and then James being, washed upon the shores of Africa. But it also might explain why he was so exemplary and odd in the academy.
Yeah, there is something that caused his divergence in the academy. It was stark. It was almost immediate after his second year. But remember, we are a sum of all our experiences. James was not formed and shaped simply by Africa or by Nootka. Most likely a combination of all. But I love this email.
Excellent work, Kevin. Lots
Very
of...
good.
It's amazing. It's like a link is worth 1,000 words. So
yeah, and honestly, this is why things like the River Rant are great. Without the podcast, without us, setting up our community, Kevin is sitting home researching all this, and no one else knows it. So it's great now because we never would have known Kevin.
Right. Like we said at the beginning of this podcast, that hive mind that helped crack Westworld is at it again, and we appreciate it. On a different note, this one comes from Adam in Melbourne. And Adam writes, "Hey guys, I picked up on your podcast about halfway through Westworld and really enjoyed the format. I've kicked on to Taboo and I'm loving that too. I don't mean to sound harsh, but one thing that does irk me a touch is that it seems each and every letter you spend the first minute self-flating about how great the show is. We get it. The readers love the show. I love that Raj is excitable, but we don't need to hear it every 2 minutes. Check out the guys over at Bald Move. Big D, you rock. Cheers."
Oh, yes.
Adam
Thank you.
from Melbourne.
Yes, Adam. Good. I like it. Thank you. It's difficult. We are newer still in the podcasting game, and I have been a longtime listener of the Bald Move guys, and that was one of the reasons why we started the podcast. And these are battles that we go into every day. But we spend time to truncate a lot of the emails, and pulling all of them out isn't always as easy as it sounds. But I'm glad to hear that you don't think I self-fillet. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, Big D's not nearly as flexible as the rest of us. I was unsure, Adam, if you meant that we were talking, when you say the show, and this is a battle that I have all the time, is I don't believe that there are huge fans of us. I believe there's huge fans of the shows that we're talking about. And so I never say our fans. It's, fans of Taboo, fans of Westworld. And we're just part of that community. We're fans ourselves. So I didn't know if you were talking about, when you say the show, if readers love us, or if we're talking about the shows that we're watching.
No, I think he has to be talking about, usually the first line in an email is like, "Hey, I love you guys. I listen to you, this and that." So when he means the show, I think he means the podcast.
Okay, and that's how I took it. I just wanted to, before I got reactionary on that. Now, for me, again, I think anybody, if you want to do an exercise in finding out what these things look like in the raw form, I encourage you to go to shadontv.com and click on the River Rants, and we trim that fat big time. We appreciate it for sure. We appreciate when people write in and tell us that we're doing a great job. That feels nice. But we often, the first thing I do is I skip over those lines because I don't think that, the people listening at home give a shit about how much people like us. But as Big D said, sometimes it's very hard to extricate that. It would be much more work to get rid of it than just to read it.
And also, we've tried to make the podcast like a normal conversation. And the hardest thing to do is to be able to pull yourself out of it. So if you're debating with your buddy, you're going to say, "Hey, fuck you, dude. I called it. And we have to really be cognizant of always not, beating our chest and making it seem like the podcast is about us. And Gene and I are on the same page with that. And we fight with Roger quite a bit because Roger likes to grandstand when he gets something right. And we have to remind him, dude, the podcast isn't about you. People aren't listening for us. They're kind of in the circle with us. And it's much easier to critique it, but trust me, we're trying our best not to do it. But if I could self-fillet, I might try it.
We already don't leave the house because we're stuck doing this show 3 nights a week. I just imagine that we would actually never, ever leave the house if we could self-fillet. Probably stop doing the podcast because we clearly only do this for the oral. Where's my sub?
But Adam, thank you very much. Appreciate you listening to us, and comparing us with Bald Move is high praise.
Absolutely. So that wraps it up for the River Rants this week. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. Facebook, you can search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website, once again, is shatontv.com. And email, if you'd like to be on the River Rants, is hosts@shatontv.com. Also, if you just have a comment, be sure to include in that comment you don't want it read on the River Rants, just so we don't make the mistake of sharing something you didn't want shared. We're everywhere fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please be sure to subscribe, and if you stop by iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. Also, you can check out our store on the website for cool Shat on TV merchandise that helps keep the lights on. So on behalf of my co-hosts Big D and the Raj, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on the banks of the River Thames next Tuesday, immediately after Taboo in the U.S., and we will be there with another deep dive for you immediately after it releases. Thanks so much for listening, and thank you so much for your emails. We appreciate each and every one. Good night.